All right, cool. Thank you, Paula. So like I said, if you go to view in the upper right corner and switch to speaker, you should be able to see my screen, and I'll be the primary speaker. So it should make it bigger for you so that you can kind of see all the things that I'll be sharing on my screen. Now I want to be able to see. There we go. Okay. So hi, I'm Webs. I am a software developer, engineer, infra engineer, jack of all trades. I was a teacher for a number of years, switched careers, and now I'm an engineer. And today I want to talk about unidentified automatable processes. And what does that really mean? So like I mentioned before, if you are doing sketch notes or just want to share out little bits and pieces of information, you can see right here my handle. Also tag Women Who Code Cloud or Women Who Code in general. It's great, and follow them. They're amazing. But yeah, so if you want to do some things on Twitter, tweet some things out, I would love to see that. And that is where you can do it. So I'm going to give you one more second to get it, and then I'm going to switch over to something different. All right. So unidentified automatable processes, like what does that really mean? Well, thinking about what our objective is, what our end goal, what's the ideal state that we would like to get to when it comes to automation. And so like how things go now, like the state of things now is probably like if you're an infrastructure engineer or an app developer, standing up new infrastructure is probably something like this, right? So if you're an app developer, then your team puts in a request, you say need a new storage account or a new key vault, it goes to the infrastructure team, but they're serving a lot of different teams and there's competing priorities. So they have to decide like, what's the thing that's going to take the priority? What do we work on first? And it has to go through this whole prioritization process, and then it finally gets into a sprint, and then that work gets done, and then that has to go through QA until finally you get to where your team now has that storage account that you were looking for. But like it's been a little bit, it's taken a little bit of time. And there maybe is a better way. Like what if instead of that, it looked something more like this? So you need this new resource and you put it into your chat like, hey, I need this new resource, magic bot thing. Magic bot says, okay, I'm going to create the storage account, and bam, your storage account is created. What does that whole process look like? Well, you start out, you're like, okay, I make this request to your bot. And then from there, it's going to make a post request to your repo. So it takes your code, it's going to send it to your repo in GitHub. My little GitHub thing go to, there we go. From there, maybe a pipeline runs. That pipeline might decide to run like a Terraform plan or something. All that code gets pushed. It opens a PR for the infrastructure team to review, and the infrastructure team can then approve it. So instead of this whole process taking, weeks, the process instead can take a matter of minutes or at most hours, depending on how busy your infrastructure team is. However, we can't pretend that that whole process doesn't take a little bit of setup, right? So to have a bot that exists on a server that runs securely, makes calls securely, it takes a little bit of upfront effort to be able to build out those tools. It's not just going to happen magically. It's not just going to happen overnight. And I don't know about you, but typically if I were to go to a project manager and say, hey, give me like 2 sprints and we can build this really cool automation bot thing so that we can have our app dev teams deploy resources via chat. And more than likely, the response you'll get will be something like this. Like, we're not going to spend 2 sprints on building you some tools. I'm sorry to tell you that, but like, that's not going to happen. So how do we get from this state of just like being laughed at to, a state of like, yeah, I think that's actually a possibility. So when the couple of things that I'm hoping that you'll be able to take away by the end of this, and also if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A, throw them in the chat. Like I mentioned, for folks who hadn't joined, about halfway through this talk, a blog post will go up on my website. And so don't stress over like making sure that all the things are there. You'll have notes to refer back to. You can always, look me up on Twitter and hit me up there or whatever. That's fine. So takeaways. By the end of this, I'm hoping that you know where you should start. So I don't know. And actually throw in the chat, like, where do you feel you're at with automation? So like on a scale of like 0 to 5, where 0 is, I have never touched automation in my life, to 5, where it's like, oh, I automate all the things. Like, where would you put yourself? And if you want to share with all panelists and attendees, you can change your drop down. But if you just want to share with me, you can also do like just panelists. Okay, so we got some 4s. That's awesome. Personally, by the way, I really enjoy automation. You have to do it more than 3 times, automate it. We'll get to that. Yep, that's a really great point. Trying to help customers get to a 5, that's also really important. And that was actually the driver for this talk, was like, sometimes we're really great as engineers about recognizing the benefits of automation, but sometimes communicating that to our customers can be a challenge, or communicating it to folks who are not engineers can be a challenge. So one thing is like, where do you start? Not only with your own automation journey, personal automation. And actually, I just put up a blog post a few days ago that's kind of like a primer on how to get started with automation. One of the things is, if you have to do it twice, like, you should probably automate it. But also knowing where to start with, how do you make the business case for your customers or for other folks in your organization for why investing in automation is beneficial. And then the second thing is, how do we get to that spot where like the folks who are making the decisions about where your time and money and efforts go will say like, yes, let's do that. Let's do this automation thing. I understand the benefits of it. I can see where it's helpful. Let's go ahead and do this. So those are kind of the 2 goals for this. By the end, hopefully you know where to start and you're on the path to getting folks to understand the benefits of automation and why you should use automated tools. There are kind of 3 themes as we go through some of the examples I'm going to walk through. So I'm going to talk through some examples of things that I've automated in the past, kind of starting from the most basic and then working all the way to the most complex. And there's sort of 3 themes throughout this, which are like the benefits of doing automation. Some of it is specific to ChatOps, but automation in general, like, why is this beneficial? And one of the things that's beneficial is you have this visibility. So being able to send messages in chat makes it so that other people can see what's going on. Instead of the coding happening just on your terminal, on your machine, and, Bob over here is doing one thing on his terminal machine, and Cindy over here is doing something else on her terminal machine, and maybe their work that they're doing is going to collide. It's visible, it's in the chat, you can see what's happening. It's auditable, so you can go back and say, oh yeah, that's right, at 8 a.m. Cindy ran this command. So you can make that work more visible to everyone. The second thing is it offers repeatability. So one of the things that I was just mentioning is, and it was also in the chat, is that if you have to do it more than once, then you should probably automate it. And the advantage to automation versus, say, a checklist is a checklist is like a midpoint step on the way to automation, because your checklist is kind of like the bones of the process you want to automate, which gives you this kind of like structure. So if you find yourself doing a checklist of all the things you need to make sure that you do in a process, that's probably some solid bones for, hey, I could automate this thing. The repeatability aspect also is consistent. So you know that it's going to be done the same way every time. It's going to be done the way that you programmed it every time. And I'm very cautious to say the way that you programmed it, because computers are basically rocks that we've taught to do complex tasks. So if whatever way that you program it is the way it's going to do the thing, keep that in mind. But it does make it very repeatable so that it's happening the same way every time. And then the last aspect that I think is really crucial is it gives you this deep focus, this ability to have deep focus. So throughout the examples, you'll see where processes that we've automated allow us to maintain that deep focus. If it is on writing code or any other task, we can focus on that task without being taken out of it. Because I don't know about you, but how many times have you gone to do a thing either on your phone or in chat or something? Pretty soon, several hours have gone by and you're still trying to get rid of all the little flags and badges and notifications that you have in your chat. And you've done a bunch of side quests of little tasks and things, and like hours have evaporated because you went into chat and got caught up in responding to people and things. So, so those are like kind of the three themes that we're going to revisit, and the process that we'll go through. Yeah, exactly. Rabbit hole. All of a sudden, you know, you're looking at the Wikipedia page for events that happened in 1912 for some reason. But the process that we'll talk about is, let me get rid of these. The process that we'll talk about is starting out by automating the squishy things. And so what does that mean, squishy things? I'm talking about like the agile processes, the people processes. I think as engineers, automating the code processes is very apparent to us in a lot of cases. But automating the softer skill type things, the agile processes, may not be quite as obvious. And so that's why the title of this talk is Unidentified Automatable Processes, because those are things that we typically may not think about. So first, we want to automate the squishy things, the people processes, the agile processes. Then we want to use those same tools to automate a thin slice of code. And I'll explain more about what that really means a little bit later. And then once we've done that, we've kind of built out for ourselves that through that series of thin slices, this MVP that demonstrates, hey, this is why spending more time and investing in building these tools like chatbots and things is actually really beneficial, because we've seen through this little MVP that we've built that this saves us a lot of time. It's easily replicatable. There are a lot of benefits to this, and it's made those benefits visual. So or visible. That's what a lot of it is like making those benefits visible. So what does this all look like? First, like I mentioned, step one was automate the squishy things, right? The most basic squishy thing to automate, in my opinion, is a reminder. Whether it's in your own life or in a chat channel, being able to automate reminders is super helpful. So here's 3 instances of some reminders that we automated on our team. So we have retrospectives, and out of those retrospectives, we end up with action items. And often what would happen is we would have our retro on a Monday, set our action items, we get involved into our work, we would forget about those action items. And then on Friday afternoon, we're frantically trying to make sure we finish those action items. So one of the things that I did was just set up in Slack and in Teams, because we use both tools, a reminder of like, hey, how are those retro items going? So it would go out every Friday, because that was pretty much the cadence of, you know, things that we were working on. So you had, I think, 2 reminders. Yeah, there were 2 reminders prior to the next retro that would help you like, hey, that's right, I should probably check on my retro action items. So that was like a really simple, like one step. If you go into Slackbot, and I mentioned this in my blog post, you can do /remind and then put in what channel you want it to remind you in, and what you want it to say as part of that reminder, how often you want it to happen, what time you want it to happen. Super basic. Another thing was we have show and tell, and show and tell is, the short of it is, it's a 30-minute period of time once a week where the engineers would get together and talk about technical topics. Usually we'd present anywhere from 1 to 3. It could be a brief talk about testing. It could be about a specific tool. But it was really meant to be just an informal place for us to talk about technical topics. I do go into more depth about what show and tell is in a blog post from a couple weeks ago, if you want to check that out. It's on my website. But it was just a reminder for like, what topics do we want to talk about? And then like that kind of evolved. So we started out with just the show and tell reminder of like, hey, what's for show and tell? But then kind of evolved that more into specific direction. So when we had that show and tell reminder in Teams, we would create a poly, like a little poll for what topics people wanted to vote on. And so the evolution or the next iteration of that was a link to the spreadsheet where we would put all of our requests for topics and then directions on how to set up the poly poll. And then maybe the next iteration of that would be automatically generating the poly poll based on the spreadsheet. So it didn't start out as a complex thing. It started out as just a really basic reminder, but then over time iterated over it so that it got like more specific and more helpful. So if we think about those three kind of topics, visibility, repeatability, and deep focus, these reminders made things visible to the entire team. So everybody on the team who was in that channel saw the reminder for retro action items, saw the reminder for show and tell. So it wasn't just one person who, had this reminder in their calendar, it showed up for everybody. And so even if I missed it, maybe somebody else saw it and then again reminded the whole team. So it gave that visibility. It also gave the repeatability. So we didn't have to think about reminding folks anymore. That was taken out of our hands, out of our way. And it just happened on a weekly cadence. It would just pop up. And that's kind of a key, I think, too, as far as a lot of automation that happens in chat is that you put the information in the path of the people who need it versus having to have them go out in search of said information. And then deep focus, that was the third thing. And so it happened automatically in a channel. And if I was working on code, it didn't disrupt what I was doing. But when I went back to that channel, I would see the reminder in that channel. So whenever it was there for whenever I looked next, I didn't have to worry about breaking focus to go take care of this other thing. And even with the other advantage, so like once it evolved into this version, that poly poll task was now repeatable because it gave specific directions on how to set it up. And then the topics were now visible because we had a link to the spreadsheet. So instead of folks having to say, oh, where's the spreadsheet for our topics? Where do I get that? Having to bookmark it, whatever. It was actually just part of the reminder. So it was very easy to just click on that spreadsheet, add my directions, and it happened once a week. So it was sort of hanging out. It's not like that was a particularly chatty channel. So it was hanging out in that channel for us to click on and access whenever we needed it. So that was a couple of the reminders. Another reminder was more geared toward our customers, and that was we had a service that we referred to as the on-duty service. And essentially it was a channel in Teams where application developers or any other wayward soul who may come along in search of answers could post questions and ask for support. And this service worked well, but it required a bit of onboarding. So we had specific operating hours. There were 2 developers from our team who were responsible for monitoring that channel. We had a series of questions that would help us diagnose issues. And so we created this little PSA or public service announcement. It was a short, 3-minute video to help folks become familiar with how that service worked. And all of this was posted every single day. So once the service opened for the day, the message that I'm showing right now would post, and it would say hey, if you're new to the service, here's where you go to view the video on how it works. And then if I had clicked see more, I wish I would have expanded this, but if I had clicked see more, it also covers these are the working hours. We should respond within 30 minutes. Here are a series of questions you can answer that will help us better diagnose your problem. So going back to those themes of visibility, repeatability, deep focus, because this was posted every day, it was very visible. So those resources were available not only to us, but to any customers that needed to use them or app developers. It was also very repeatable. So this just happened every day at 9 a.m. Eastern time. It would post this message. And so it was very accessible to anybody who needed it because it was always in the channel. Because again, depending on the day, that channel may be chatty, but sometimes it wasn't. So you'd easily be able to scroll up and see the last time it got posted. And it was at this regular cadence. So folks knew it was predictable that it would happen. The first iteration of this service did not go this well. We tried to make it responsive to when folks would post help in the channel, but there was a severe delay. And so it would be anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes before they got a response. And that was really frustrating. But we didn't scrap it entirely. And I think that's an important lesson. We just had to rethink a better way to work with the tools that we had and within those constraints in order to address the needs of our customers. So, so that was the opening for on-duty service. So it had that visibility, it had that repeatability. We didn't have to think about it or worry about it because it happened automatically. Likewise, we had a post for when the on-duty service was closed. So at the end of the day, it would say, hey, it's now 5 p.m. Eastern time. The on-duty service is closed. It will reopen the next weekday. And this was helpful for us as a team as well, because especially working across many time zones and the fuzziness that can happen around working hours, it gave us a clear delineation of like, okay, cool, we can stop being concerned about any requests that come in after this time, because we had a visual reminder of the service is now closed. We no longer have to worry about this. And then one of the other things that posted was at the beginning of each week, it would say, hey, your on-duty hosts for this week are these 2 people. And it would serve as a reminder for the folks on the team, because we paired the responsibility for monitoring on duty with some other responsibilities, running tech debt and running show and tell. And I mentioned show and tell, but tech debt is another like process, regular standing meeting that we have. I also have a blog post about that if you're interested in learning more about how we run our tech debt meetings. But yeah, this served as a reminder for our team as well, so that we knew, okay, here's who's on duty. Those people would get tagged, so they didn't have to go check the schedule. There's no place they went. That information just got put in their path. It was visible. It was repeatable. It made it so we didn't have to expend brain power on thinking about that anymore. So on duty service and reminders and, the next like sort of group, so that's like sort of my reminders group of things. The next group of things is more about habits and routines. So one of the things that we did was we would rotate stand-up host. So every day when we had stand-up, a different person would run the board, so that that responsibility was shared across our entire team. And initially it was a manual job. We had a shared notebook, and we had a list of all the people in order and what date they were supposed to do. They were supposed to run stand up. We'd have to go to that notebook, check to see whose turn it was, and go from there on who was supposed to be rotating. Inevitably, what kind of happened was we would show up to stand up and then go, oh yeah, whose turn is it? And then we'd have to go check and see whose turn it was. It also meant that every single person had to check that schedule every single day, which was a lot of people power. And sort of going back to the example I mentioned before, where if you have a checklist, it's highly likely you're on your way to automation. So instead of having it be a manual process, we ended up making it an automation. So going back to like the repeatability theme, what would happen is there was we had a spreadsheet, like a table that had the name of the people, their email, an ID for them, and then if they were supposed to be stand-up hosts today or not. And the automation would go check that list, see whose turn it was to do stand-up, tag that person. So at the top, you'll see it says today's stand-up host is, and then it would tag that person. And then it would make list who was up next. So it was just a rotation kind of thing. And it was set to run only on work days. So we didn't have to worry about accounting for weekends or calculating dates or anything. It was just rotating throughout the weekdays. I did pause it like on holidays, but changing it wasn't difficult, because again, down at the bottom, there was a link to how to make modifications to the rotation. So if someone was out sick or something, all we had to do was click the link or copy the link, go to the thing, make changes in the table that we needed to, and it would go on about its business. And this ran about 30 minutes before stand up. So that also meant that that person had a little bit of advance notification. Hey, like you're going to be the person running stand up today, just FYI. So that was another thing, that it was repeatable. It happened every day. It took a little tweaking and had some hiccups, but again, didn't trash it entirely, just made some necessary adjustments so that it worked a little bit more smoothly. And it saved us a tremendous amount of like time figuring out whose turn it was, cognitive load, figuring out like, okay, and if it's your turn and if we rotate and I got to check this thing and you got to check this thing. So it was just happen. It was just in our path. It was visible to everyone. It was repeatable to everyone. And that table where we rotated through was now visible to everyone. So it wasn't, so when I left this team, they still had the ability to see that document, to access it. They didn't have to go hunting for it. It still existed. And within that automation, it made it pretty clear, like, hey, this is what you need to do to make changes here. We also did that for Showcase Host. So as folks would rotate through Showcase Host, it would publish every other Monday who was responsible for running Showcase for that week. That was another responsibility that we rotated. So visibility, it also allowed us to keep deep focus because it would tag the one person whose responsibility it was to run the stand-up that day, but it meant that like not all of us had to stop what we were doing and go check, which was really nice. Another place where we did some automation was with PRs, so pull requests. Anytime that we opened or closed a pull request on a watched repository, it would post that PR to our PR channel. So you have that visibility. Hey, I opened a PR, it goes into the PR channel. It's repeatable. So it was a task that we didn't have to worry about. And going back to that example I mentioned at the top, where like, if you're working on code, you don't want to get pulled into a chat situation, or if you're working on writing stories, like you don't want to get pulled into a chat situation where suddenly you're responding to people and trying to get rid of all the little alerts that you have and all of that. So the flow would go something like, we would finish our code, we would open a PR, we would have the people added to the PR automatically, and then you could go right back into working on whatever it is you wanted to do next. Instead of the old way of doing things was, we open the PR, we copy the URL, we go to the PR channel, we write a message about what the PR is, we add a link to the PR, and then, inevitably get caught up in the rabbit hole of chat. So this also made it so that we didn't have to expend the energy to think about what to say in our message, because I don't know about you, but most of my brain energy goes toward two things, and that's crafting messages to write to other people and commit messages. That's where all my brain power goes. So it saves a tremendous amount of brain power to not have to think about that and for it to happen the same way every time. Also, using the emojis makes it so that like it's an immediate like visual flag of, oh, this is a new PR. It has the 3 flame emojis. It's a new PR. I should probably go check this. Likewise, because we automated the notification for closing PRs, if I see in the channel a bunch of PRs that have opened, but then I also see that those PRs have closed, I don't have to expend my energy to go look through those unless I so desire. Like, I'm just feeling like I want to read through some PRs that have already closed. So that also helped figure out and narrow down where our focus should be, because it would also let us know, hey, this PR is closed, you don't need to review it. So we're not falling into that trap of context switching to the chat application to post our PR message, and then we post it and then we don't get any notification that it's closed. So then we go look at it only to find that it's closed already, and it ends up being a whole waste of time. So yeah, chat applications can be great for sharing knowledge, but they can become a time suck if you go through reading unanswered questions. And so in order to stay in that deep focus, deep work mode, this all got automated. So we didn't even need to worry about it. Another place I mentioned story writing. Another place that we automated was in our story writing channel. So we had a channel where stories that needed further technical refinement or review would get posted there so that we could review them, check them, and then move them on to the next phase of the process, our whole development process. And the first pass on that automation was anytime someone would add a new story or update a story that had the needs grooming tag, it would post to that channel. So it had that repeatability, it had that visibility. It even provided a bit of deep focus because you could, just tag that story and move on to the next thing instead of being sucked into revisiting chat. The only trouble was when we started getting a higher volume of stories, that channel got really noisy. So didn't completely get rid of the whole process, just tweaked it a little. Recognize that we really only need story updates like twice a day because we had a pretty long backlog of different stories to review. And so we refined that automation a bit, and instead it would just post twice a day. So what that automation did, it would run a query of all the stories that had the needs grooming tag, and then post that to the channel with a link to each story. So that, going back to the deep focus, instead of people being pinged directly about it or having to scroll through the channel to find what they needed, it would give them a main list of all the stories that needed review, and you could just work your way through each of the stories, click on them, figure out which ones, what kind of things you need. You could do a couple stories at a time. You could go through the whole list if you wanted, depending on how you wanted to break up your day. But it allowed the team to have more control and over deciding how they wanted to spend their time. And it just put that information in their path. So here's the information for whenever you need it. But it's not constantly tapping you on the shoulder, annoying you or anything. And as we've gone through each of those, you can see that the automation is getting more complex. So we started with just really basic, hey, we're just going to do a basic reminder in a chat. And now we're getting into like, okay, now I'm going to run this query, and the query is going to pull the stories, and it's going to post that in a specific format into the channel, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't something that happened overnight. And in fact, the question then becomes, when did this happen? When did I do these things? When did I do this work? And so a lot of the time it was just little 1% improvements, like while I was waiting for a Terraform plan to run, or while I was waiting for an apply to run, or waiting for a meeting to start, or maybe a meeting ended a few minutes early. So I would spend a little bit of time like tweaking some of the automations. So it wasn't a thing where like I set aside this huge, like, I'm going to spend an entire day getting these work. Like, no, it took about 2 seconds to get the reminder set up. I spent a little bit of time just getting familiar with Power Automate. I wasn't familiar with initially, but I've used shortcuts for a while now. I've used IFTTT. I've used Zapier. So it's basically the same. It's sort of these blocks of like Lego blocks of sort of code that you put together that produce some result for you.
I seem to see a frozen video. I'm not sure, Webbs, if you can still hear us.
Yeah, I think like it stopped. I'm not very sure if she's still there. She is still there, but I think the internet might be an issue. Sorry, guys, just give it a few minutes.
Having
Perhaps if you want, you can just,
rejoin.
yeah, rejoin, like log out and rejoin again.
Yes, having technical difficulties.
Yeah. I hope everyone is enjoying the session. Feel free to, drop any questions that you might have.
Yeah, this might be a good time to think of a couple of questions. I know I'm interested in what the strangest things that Webbs has automated have been, because sometimes it's just really strange things that you wind up automating. So think of some questions while Webbs is getting her computer back on the webs. We need Webbs
Yeah.
on the webs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've got a message that she's back on her way.
Awesome.
Well, that was fun.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, my machine just went totally green screen and completely shut down. So that was interesting. If there were questions before, I can't see them anymore. But anyway, where were we? Okay, so automating in the in-betweens, and Let me just get back to where it was. Okay. So, yeah. So it was just like, it was stuff that would happen in the in-between. And then we had a situation where, we had someone on our client side who was thinking about, so this is kind of moving into that whole idea of use those same tools and automate thin slices. A thin slice to me is a complete end-to-end something that provides value. And so one of the folks on the client side was saying, hey, I have this situation. I think that I could use automation to solve this problem. And so to give a bit of context on what that issue was, oh, thank you, Sunitha. I'm glad I'm back too. Yeah, so to give a little bit of a context, so there was a situation where there was a bug in code, and there was a bug in code, and in order to like deal with it in the interim, they basically would manually go in and kill what are called ghost tasks. So the ghost tasks were really just tasks that would die in the system but not be removed. And so they were trying to figure out like, okay, how can we automate this process and make it more visible in order to like make it a bit easier on our team. And so what he had conceived of was like, oh, I feel like what we could do is send a message to our chat channel, like a specific chat channel, and then have it do a simple like delete call with the API, and then it would delete that particular task from the system. Totally sound idea, right? So now we've shifted from those squishy processes, things like tagging stories and stuff like that, into more code related processes, but still not building out like the extended infrastructure of a ChatOps bot. And so that's what he ended up doing. So he figured out how to use Power Automate in order to automate this process of like putting in chat that this task needs to be deleted. It made the call and then came back and said, your task has been deleted. It allowed for that visibility and auditability because everyone else on the team who is in that channel could see what was happening and who was doing what work. It was attributed to a specific person instead of them doing that work on their terminal and not being able to see who's doing what work. So I could see Alice is deleting task A and Bob is deleting task B. And I don't have to worry about that because I can see in chat that they've already done it. It's already happened. It also allowed them to go back and review like what tasks have been deleted. So you have that auditability or you have that visibility, somewhat deep work or deep focus related, because now I know those things are already taken care of and I don't have to stop what I'm doing to go remove task A because I know that's already been done. So he got his automation working, it worked for his team. And doing thin slices like that, if you build up a little catalog of those things, then you've created this MVP that says, hey, this is basically, we want to build our own thing that does all of this stuff. So yeah, we've been using these tools and we've been getting along fine, but what if we had something that we had more power over, that we could extend out and maintain ourselves in order to build an actual like useful tool that we can tweak as needed. So that's where those little using things like Power Automate or Slack bots or whatever can kind of build thin slices and MVPs that you can then compile together and say, hey, these are all the benefits to our to building something like this. We want to invest a sprint or two in being able to do that. And so like we talked about at the beginning, we start out here being laughed at, like how we're not spending sprints on that. And then by going through this process of automating the squishy things and then using those same tools to automate code things and then using those thin slices to demonstrate your MVP, then maybe there's like change of tune. So the next time you ask, you may get some approval on that. And then you feel like, yes, vindication, I've done it. So where to start? Like if at the top I mentioned, hopefully by the end of this, you'll know where to start and you'll have a path on where to go as far as like what tools to use to kind of get started. And so the first thing is just that, like, what tools do you have available to you? What is accessible to you? Are you using Teams? Are you using Slack? Are you using Power Automate? Are there bots available? Like, what is available to you right now? Get familiar with those tools. And also experiment on yourself. So build a private channel and test out stuff in that private channel. That was something that I did, because one of the things that I created too was a little bot within, it wasn't in Power Automate, it was called something else, but I'm drawing a blank right now. But essentially it was a little chat bot that would allow us to like tag stories and things like that. And I created a private channel to test that out first. So start with a private channel and just experiment, set up your own reminders. In Slack, there's that, you can have like a notebook with yourself in chat. So check that out. And then when you go to your team, you can say, hey, I've used this on myself. This is how this works. This is why it's beneficial. Start with the basic stuff. So like I mentioned, scheduling or reminders is probably the easiest place to start. Think about 2 things right now that you could probably put a channel reminder out there for your team, or even for yourself to start out with, just to kind of experiment and see how you want to tweak it. So start with the basic stuff and just schedule reminders. Use that in between time to kind of get familiar with the tools, and then slowly build and add complexity. And then the last thing is to share it out, make it visible, bring it up during meetings and chats and every opportunity that you have to share it. If you have something like a show and tell time, that's a perfect place to share some of the work that you've been doing. Even if you want to do it in your own time and kind of practice with the tools that you have and work on things, that's also an option. And yeah, that should, I hope, cover all the things that I said it would cover. Like I mentioned, this should be up on my blog now. So if you want to go check it out after this, all of this information is here without the weird interruption where I got disconnected. All of the different tips, all of the examples, they're all there. You can also sign up if you want to get updated on more things, because my goal is to make this a series where we move from how do you start with nothing all the way to how do I get ChatOps set up. So if you want to know about those future things, you can sign up there as well. And also thank you so much to Women Who Code and to you, Paula, for hosting. This was super fun. And yeah, it was great. I appreciate it.
Was great. And we have questions, even better. So thank you so much, Webs. I've got a couple questions here in the chat. Let me start with I'm learning so much. And there's a question. I was curious to know, if you use these kinds of tools, do you set up accounts for the company? Do you document this so that if you choose to move on, others will understand how it works? What a great question.
That is a fantastic question. So in an ideal situation, it would be nice to have a service account that manages everything so that as people come and go, you don't have to worry about changing responsibility. But that depends on the limitations of your of the tools that you're using, your environment, a lot of different things. In one case, I had to use my personal service account. And so when I left, I had to then hand it off to someone else, which was suboptimal, but we managed okay. You can typically export some of the things you've been building. And so you could keep a library of it. Also, I think this is why the sharing out is so important. Because if you're working, in a little darkened closet by yourself, no one's going to know that stuff exists and no one's going to understand how it works. So it's really important, that sharing out piece, for that reason. So that in the event that you don't, even if you had a service account, I would say make sure that you are communicating out how things work. I did a pairing session with one of my colleagues, and I had been so deep into it, I didn't see a perfect opportunity to kind of refactor my code and optimize it a bit better. And he's like, hey, you could change this here and do this here, and it would make it a lot easier to maintain. I was like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. So even taking opportunities, if you can, to pair with other folks on your team so you can kind of walk them through, this is what I built, this is what it does, this is how it works.
Great. We've got even more. So I'll group one of my own questions into this next one. The question is, how can this cross over into everyday life, like scheduling tasks or reminders to say, call your mom, for example? And my question is similar. I want to know, what's the weirdest thing that you've automated?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So the primer blog that I did covers more of that. So as far as things that I have automated. So like, I used to travel a lot because I was a traveling consultant. And one of the things that got under my skin was my checklist of stuff that I needed to pack, because I'd like, first I made a template, but then I'd have to like delete and change things the whole time. And then I was listening to a podcast called Automators, which I linked to in the blog. And they were like, oh, I have this master list. And basically it's a series of lists and you decide which lists to use based on where you're going. So, and I go in depth in the blog post, but it was like, okay, if any trip that I go on, I want these things. If I'm going to visit my family in Michigan, I want to bring these things. If I'm not going to Michigan, then I only need these things. And so I can just quickly go through and tap that, and it'll go through and add all that stuff to my to-doist list for travel. And so that has saved me so much headache, because it's also always consistently the same thing. As for the weirdest thing I've automated, one of my very first automations on IFTTT was if I lost my phone, I could send myself an email, my phone would ring, and it was like this robotic voice that did the little Liam Neeson, I have a very specific set of skills, so that if someone were to find my phone and answer it, that's what would play. So that's probably one of the weirder things I've automated. I also have an automation where if the Dodgers win, I can tap the automation and it'll start playing I Love LA.
I love it. Okay, so, but there are more questions. This is amazing. So this is a good one. When do you decide that automation will not be beneficial? Like, for example, something can take minutes to do, but take hours to automate. How do you judge that situation?
Oh, I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule for this. I think that it's definitely a sort of a gut feeling kind of thing. I think it's something you can check in with yourself on. So if you try to automate something and you are finding that, like, if it is something that I know I only do twice a year, it may not be worth automating. Or maybe I can do a more simple version of automating, or automate part of it instead of the whole thing. So I don't have like a hard and fast rule or heuristic. You just kind of have to get a feel for it and recognize when, hey, am I sinking in really like way more time than is beneficial? I think thinking about how many people are going to use it, how often you're going to use it, or the urgency or the level of importance of the task being done right. I think those are some things to think about. It's a really great question.
Yeah, that was. I like to, when I look at old code or do modernization, I like to do Marie Kondoing the architectures. Does this architecture give me joy when I hold it in my hands? So I think you are the Marie Kondo of automation, that if you do something and it doesn't give you joy, you should automate it. So I want to see I want to see your next blog post about Marie Kondoing your life through automation.
Oh, let's write that down. That's a great idea.
Okay, one more here. I've got, thanks for the super informative talk. How do you track and manage all the various automations and automation methods as the number of automations grow? What another great question.
Yeah, so this is a problem with Power Automate, is that Power Automate doesn't, it makes you repeat a lot of flows, even though there are only small things changing, which can be kind of frustrating. I think that one of the key skills to growing in automation is recognizing when you've outgrown a tool. So for example, like Power Automate, like we were right on the verge of maybe we need to look into like the next step up, which is I can't think, it's not flows, it's something else, and I always forget the name of it, but like there's a next step up where it's code-based automations that you can version control and all that kind of thing. But it requires, again, a little bit more upfront investment in writing out that code in the first place. So I think that it's a sign that you're maybe outgrowing the tool if you're noticing things like that. I think too, there are plenty of automations that I have that I've just forgotten. Like they are so just in, like one of the first automations, I mentioned this in the blog post too, one of the first automations I built was a simple reminder that sends me an email, I think 3 times a week, to remind me to check my bank account. And it was just I was a pretty broke teacher, right on the verge of like, iffiness. So I wanted to keep tabs on my bank account often. And so that was like a basic automation that I put in place. And it still happens to this day. I don't particularly need it anymore, but I just leave it because it is sometimes a good reminder. But it's just a thing that exists, that happens. And a lot of times I forget about it and it just keeps running. It just keeps running. Like I have one automation in my shortcuts that will record whenever I run an automation. And so I have a note that has like every automation I've run on my phone for the last like 3 years, 2 years. And it just runs, and I don't really check that note very often, but it's kind of neat to go back to it and be like, oh, I run this automation a lot or that automation a lot. So sometimes, you know, you forget that they're there, and maybe that's the best kind of automation. It's like the best password is one that you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Or is there any logging? Like the last thing that every automation that you create does is log something. And then you can say, here's everything that I've automated over the past year. And then you can kind of Marie Kondo that and say, do I really need this one anymore?
Yeah.
Do you have like any kind of observability kind of in the automations?
That's really the only one I have, is the one that like logs everything. But other than that, I don't have anything.
Okay. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Anyone else? We are 4 minutes from the top of the hour. And I'm just checking the Q&A in the chat. I think we've covered anything that has come up. If not, please post. And then also, Webbs, do you have any parting words of wisdom for everyone?
I would say if you haven't dipped your toe into the waters of automation, start with something simple. One of the things that I talk about in the personal automation post is like sometimes menus are a really good place to start. They had mentioned that on Automators one time, and I thought it was really good advice, because then it's just reducing the choices you have to make. And that can actually be really beneficial from your brain's perspective. So I would say play around. Like if you have an iPhone, Shortcuts is free. IFTTT has a lot of like free automations you can test out. Look through the libraries. Power Automate has a pretty extensive library of things it connects to. And if you are someone who already is pretty high on the automation scale, think about how you can share that with other folks, or how you can like make it more visible and applicable to like your non-engineering business side partners.
Very cool. And one last request, can you post the link to your blog?
I sure can.
So that we can capture that for posterity.
Putting it in the chat, making sure it's going to everyone and not just panelists. There we go.
There we are. So I want to also just capture that for the webinar. It's UAPs, Unidentified Automatable Processes at websonthewebs.com. So check it out, and thank you again so much for this talk, Webbs. It's been a lot of fun and great content.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. This is fun.
All right. With that, everyone, thank you for joining, and see you at the next webinar from Women Who Code Cloud.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.